Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo. We're on to the second half of Bag B this week, the rear suspension of the Tamiya Wildone Blockhead. So we're up to step 21, the rear trailing arms. We need two 1150 bearings, two black O-rings, two axles, two drive shafts, E1 and E4 the arms, and the rubber boots. The first thing to do is trim the boots. There's a nice diagram that shows us what needs to be removed to separate them. I find some small scissors works best, cutting just slightly wide of the lines on the rubber. Remember, you can always trim a little bit more off, but of course you can't add it back. When trimmed, you should have two identical boots. Next, we need to carefully push the drive shaft through the boot. A nice bit of grease over the end does help a lot. The trick is not to force things, just work it back and forth until it pops through. Repeat with the second one and they're ready to install. The cups on the axles need a bit of grease, and to take up some of the slop we also slot in an O-ring and push it to the bottom of the cup. It can be tricky to get it to sit nicely though without flipping, so just be careful. I found the easiest method with this buggy is to use the small Allen key to press the O-ring in, getting it mostly in the right spot. Then when we offer up the drive shaft and the boot, press it in the rest of the way. Once the shaft and boot are in, we need to slide on a bearing and press it into the inside of an arm. Rinse and repeat, and that's the rear arms done. Step 22, fitting the arms. We need two M3x20s, four M3x6s, the two arm holders, the 6x76.8mm shaft, which is a bit of an odd size, and of course we're going to need the chassis. Now before we fit the arms, we need to add some grease to the shaft that they're going to run on. A nice little blob around the end will do. As we slide the arm on, it's going to spread itself around. The arm should slide all the way on, leaving a couple of millimeters of the shaft exposed. To hold the arm in place, we need to offer up one of the metal retainers and thread in two of the M3x6s. Once they're done up, the arm should swing freely. If it's at all stiff or catches and clicks, loosen the screws and give the retainer a bit of a wiggle before retightening. The right hand arm is ever so slightly sticky near the middle of the throw, just enough that it doesn't fall under its own weight, but we'll let this pass. It's so minor it'll free up by itself after a couple of minutes of running. Next, right at the back of the cage, we need to insert the shaft and install the two long screws, one in each end. Make sure the screws are nicely nipped up, and that's step 22 complete. Okay, step 23, the motor. We need the two pinions, a 15 and an 18 tooth, and a M3x3 grub screw. Now I'm going to use the small pinion, which will give us a bit more torque but less speed than the large pinion. It's worth noting I'd also highly recommend replacing the stock aluminium pinion with a steel one. The stock ones never last all that long, and as they wear, the teeth eventually get to the point that they'll eat the plastic gear too. You'll want to look for a 0.8 mod pinion in steel or even brass. The motor has a rubber tube protecting the shaft, which we need to pull off. Then we can thread the grub screw into our chosen pinion, just a turn or so, and offer it up to the motor. We need to see 16mm between the face of the pinion and the face of the motor, although I wouldn't worry too much about it being spot on, as we're almost certainly going to need to adjust it anyway to get it centered on the spur gear. Okay, step 24, fitting the motor. We need two M3x27s, two 3x12 self-tappers, the motor, chassis, and when we get to it, A6, the gear cover. Like a lot of Tamiyas, the motor has a couple of fixed positions rather than a fully adjustable mount, which makes life easy as we just need to choose the right holes that matches our chosen pinion. At the bottom of the step in the diagram, it shows us which ones to use, so we just need to pop the screws in and offer up the motor. Once the screws are nice and snug, we can check the pinion to make sure it's close to central on the spur gear. If it's well behind or sticking out, take the motor off again and adjust the pinion's position. Tamiya also want us to add a bit of grease to the pinion, which I probably should have done first, but we can still get the end of the tube in the hole to add some, so it's not the end of the world. To cover up the big hole, we have a rather nice cover. It just sits on the gearbox and gets attached with the two self-tappers. Now you can get some rather nice third-party machined aluminium covers anodized in various colours. I think a blue one might add a nice bit of a custom feel, as well as replacing the motor for one with an open end bell. Minor mods that will make the gearbox look that bit nicer. Okay, step 25, the rear dampers. I'm going to assume you watched the video 2 videos ago where we assembled the front dampers, because the rear ones are almost exactly the same. Just a slightly larger piston, some rather funky short springs. Otherwise the seals, bladder and filling method are all the same. So after step 25 they should look like this. Then after step 26 they should look like this, but of course being full of oil. And after step 27 they should look like this, with the rubber bushings at the top and a ball collar at the bottom. Right, step 28, attaching the dampers. We need 2 M3x27s, 2 3x15 self-tappers, 2 M3 nylock nuts, 4 3mm washers and 2 4x6 brass tubes. Although Tamiya say they're gold, which does seem a bit unlikely. I'm pretty sure they just mean the colour. At the top of the dampers we need to pop one of the tubes into the bushing, slide in one of the long screws, and we add a washer over the threads. The screw then goes through the mounting hole in the cage and we use one of the nuts to hold it in place. Don't forget the cage plastic is fairly soft and flexible, so we don't want to go crazy tightening the nut. Just take up the slack, plus a 1/4 to a 1/2 turn will be fine. If you go too far, all you're going to achieve is squashing the plastic. At the bottom of the damper we need a self-tapper to go through the ball collar, then a washer over the threads, which sounds easy, but the damper is ever so slightly too long to line up with the hole in the arm at full droop. So while holding the screw and washer, you also have to slightly compress the damper with one hand while threading in the screw with the other. A bit of a faff, but once you've got the position just so, it's not too bad. The other damper is exactly the same, so do that, and we've got a rear end pretty much complete. Next time we're going to be on to bag C and installing the electronics and most likely the body too. Right, as always, thanks for watching, like if you like, subscribe if you haven't, and leave a comment if there's something on your mind. Bye guys!